Destiny Burton, and I would like to present to you my PowerPoint presentation on how to have a lovely marriage. First, I would like to take you to the post-honeymoon phase. Now, the honeymoon phase is that phase where you're so in love with your partner that nothing can go wrong. It's all new and enchanting and perfect. However, when this ends, many people fall into the cycle of daily life and the drudgery of realizing that it's not going to always have this magic. That, for some, can make them fall apart or even lose emotional connection with their partner. So you need to begin to figure out how to experience that normal life together. Second, I want to point out that after the honeymoon phase, as you're getting into the cycle of normal life, you need to start preparing for problems, and you need to be ready to communicate about those problems, which brings me to my next point. Let's discuss communication. First, you're going to want to be polite. When you communicate with your partner, you're not going to want to yell at them, tear them down, as that does not help the discussion, and it only shows that you're afraid of their opinion. Second, you need to maintain honesty. If you are unable to be honest in a discussion with your partner, then there's going to be no possibility of truly reaching a conclusion, and it's not going to be truly beneficial. Third, you need to be able to communicate regularly. If you're not communicating every day or setting aside regular time to connect, then emotions can build up. We can build up tension and frustration inside of ourselves and then explode. We're going to either explode or implode, and it usually happens at our partner. This is not what we want. So we need to make sure we're not holding back our emotions, but sharing them and experiencing them together. You're no longer an individual. You are no longer two separate people. You are one. You are a unit. And this also means that you're doing things together. It is no one's fault, and you need to resist the temptation to blame. So let's look at this graph. With that open communication, you need to be willing to talk about problems that you have, such as your vulnerabilities, your fears, maybe guilt. You need to be able to express when you feel guilty and share your shame. You need to be willing to admit your sins with your partner. Otherwise, it will always be an I am right situation. And that is actually one of the red flags we will discuss later. You need to figure out what are the roles I am going to play in this relationship as you are now entering marriage. And you need to find and feel adequate. You need to make sure that through all of this, as you're talking about this, that you see that this conflict is all avoided. And it should help suppress that feeling of denying that you are in the wrong, denying that there are any negative emotions, because that's another great problem. Denying negative emotions is worse than actually expressing them with your partner. Now, moving on to a completely different topic, let's talk intimacy. First, you need to be able to trust and respect your partner. Otherwise, intimacy cannot exist. There are different kinds of intimacy, and when you hear the word, you may be thinking of one or the other. There are platonic intimacy. This is usually held within a friendship, and that's the base of a relationship. There is deceptive intimacy, which some people have in their relationships, which is one of the reasons I want to point out that why trust is so necessary. Because in deceptive intimacy, both partners are not trusting each other. One is trusting another who is using them for something else. So the trust should be a two-way street. There should also be personal intimacy. You need to be willing to spend time with them. You need to be willing to be one-on-one. Now, I believe that intimacy goes far beyond the connotation of sexual intimacy, which you may have thought about as soon as I said the word. It is all part of a friendship, a trusting relationship that is between two people that connects on a deeper level than anything else. Furthermore, I'd like to point out that intimacy is actually part of the triangular love theory. The triangular love theory is that love is composed of passion, intimacy, and commitment. This was developed by Sternberg, if you remember, from week 5 in our chapter 10 reading. Now, let's move on. Sometimes in a relationship, as mentioned before, you will enter conflicts. I was reading this book by John Gottman, who explained a great deal about conflicts and how they start. And then I would like to point out to you how to keep them from even beginning and how to fix the situation. So Gottman explained that conflicts usually begin with a harsh startup, which is yelling, saying negative statements to the other. It's usually accusatory or sarcastic. Conflicts are very they're verbal attacks. There are what John Gottman calls the 4 horsemen of conflicts. There's criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. If you are seeing any of these 4 things in your relationship, you should go to a counselor, or you should talk it out until the issue is resolved. The first one, criticism. Criticism is different than a complaint, because a complaint is addressing an issue, a need, versus criticism, which is attacking the person directly on a personal level. The second horseman, which is contempt, is treating your partner with hatred and mockery, saying things such as, "You're awful, you're an idiot, you're a loser, and I've given up on you," is how they perceive the statements you said. They may hear this in their head. You may not be saying it word for word, but that's how it comes across. And naturally, in response to this, the partner hearing these things is going to display defensiveness. And the partner displaying defensiveness is then going to be called weak. They're going to be called more names, and it's just going to spiral into chaos. And to avoid more emotional hurt, they're going to stonewall, which is just blocking out all engagement, interaction, and sensory input from their partner. Now, if you aren't seeing any of these things in conflicts, that's great. So let's move on to another thing that can happen in a conflict. One or both partners may decide to do what's called flooding, which is where a spouse's negativity is so overwhelming that the other it's usually in the form of a rant, that the other person just can't take it. And they can't get through their regular lives, nor be able to function in a healthy format. Those who are victim to this are more likely to request divorce. And fourth, body language. Your body language when you are talking to someone, how you move your hands, your facial expressions, how close you are to them. When you feel safe to someone, you are going to be closer to them versus when you first meet a person, you're going to be at least 3 feet away from them. Interestingly enough, the man who wrote this book, Gottman, monitored physiological readings of married couples when they were discussing the issues. And whenever they were having conflicts, blood pressure, hormones, and heart rate would all get dangerously unhealthy. This is quite intriguing because it correlates with other bodily signs that are connected with our emotions toward our partners. As we read about this week as well, when we are intimate and when we are in a positive state with our spouse or in a positive mental state, our brains are going to be flooded with positive hormones and release negative toxins. Now, the remedies for these sorts of situations, for starters, rather than starting harsh, we should begin with an open mind. Rather than verbally attacking, we should be kind and listen. We should be polite. And if we are listening, we'll be able to find a real solution. We have to also be willing to accept the fact that in a conflict, we could be wrong, which is very hard for many to accept. It should be a calm situation, and not every single issue needs to be discussed. Not everything is a make or break conflict or problem. Now, let's move on. The next issue I would like to discuss is finances. First thing is overall finances. When you enter a marriage, you need to be financially stable. Otherwise, you have a higher chance of falling into poverty. It also allows for a release of potential anxiety, and it gets rid of just that other thing that you'll need to juggle in this new life you are entering. And as you are financially stable, you are most likely going to be aware of inflation. Inflation has skyrocketed over the last few decades, especially since COVID, and we have all seen it. So being aware of this helps us to be more mentally in the game when we make a budget. And once we make a budget, which you should do together, you need to try your best to stick to it, because this will allow for just better financial stability and less likelihood of having any issues. And third, I'd like to point out that you're going to want to try to avoid getting into debt. You're not going to want to fall into bad habits like gambling. You're not going to. Some people are very partial to investments, which can be like gambling. And you're going to want to try and make goals to pay people back. All of these things, you should make sure you're on the same page with your partner about. Next, between a couple, they should communicate about every single financial decision that's made that is, let's say, larger than $50 or $100. So you should set a limit with your partner about where that is going to be. And also with your children, you need to make sure that you teach them the value of money, because otherwise they're going to end up like a lot of children today. They're not going to care where money comes from, and they're going to spend it frivolously. And you want to make sure that they graduate, because the rate of high school dropouts has increased over the years, thus causing children to be more financially dependent upon their parents and limited to no career at all. So this can cause an increase in crime rates for people who are desperate to get money, or it can just cause a large family strain. All right, let's move on. The next one, starting a family. Did you know that over 1/3 of pregnancies are unplanned? And with that rise in unwanted pregnancies, there is a connection to parental engagement and the lack of joy with children. I would like to quote something we read about in week, I believe it was week 3 or 4 from Focus on the Family. They made this point. Not surprisingly, we see a lot more flailing among parents today, and a lot less visionary parenting. Second, adoption is becoming a lot more popular because of higher infertility rates. Why could this be? These lower rates could be partially attributed to the older age people are when they are desiring children statistically, as pointed out by Focus on the Family. Again, they said couples who marry after the age of 27 sometimes try to spend a few years enjoying life without kids. And at some point in your relationship, you need to discuss whether or not you would like to have children or not. This is usually done in counseling prior to marriage. Now, children, let's just discuss them and their impact as a whole. First, let's discuss the impact, and then we'll get to we'll get to parenting and how to stay connected with your spouse. But let's discuss impact. There's a dramatic shift from being a single individual to having a partner, then suddenly being responsible for another life. When you go from couplehood to parenthood, from changing to being in a parenthood, the mom will bond more with the baby. And this is quite natural. I mean, for one thing, she's with the baby all the time. The baby grew inside of her, and they're physically connected. So it is easy to exclude the husband from the interaction with the baby, and that often leaves the husband out of interacting with his wife and baby, so that they don't get as much love and attention if this happens. So you got to make sure that the husband is involved in his baby and wife's life, and that will make a very big change. It can be extremely difficult suddenly having a baby. You won't always get sleep. You won't always have the time for what you believe you had before. Thus, having someone beside supporting you, helping you, and connecting with you is a much better life choice, just in general, just to be there, just to make you feel better. Even if the husband doesn't know how to help, he can help just by being there to support you. And it should be something that the husband and wife do together, because that's the way God designed it. So from this point, you can see how they need to do this together to completely keep the relationship, keep the relationship together, and to make an interaction in their child's life. And they also need to stay connected. You can stay connected by making time each day. This could be making at least 10 minutes a day by talking, hugging, and just overall connecting. But, you can keep it brief in order to fulfill your daily requirements. You could do it when you greet them. You could greet them with physical touch every time you see them, or every time you say goodbye or hello. You could plan weekend trips or vacations, and you can leave your child with a family friend, or hire a babysitter or a relative. Just find little ways to stay connected to your spouse. When parenting, you can involve socialization, which is, as your baby ages, teaching them interaction with others. And there's primary socialization and secondary socialization, where they learn who are the most important people in my life and who aren't. The primary socialization is of course going to be you two, the parents, and babysitters that come frequently when you have your time together, and anyone that they see regularly on a day or weekly basis. Secondary is just going to be those extra people coming randomly in and out of their lives that they see. And as babies are developing, they're going to be learning about reality. It just suddenly hits them. So they're experiencing reality, and it's your job to be there, holding them, just watching them take in life. As they age and are young, in younger years, you can start to teach them individualization, which is just helping them find what they enjoy to do. Teaching them, oh, you like to paint. Why don't we get you some paints? And teaching them about learning who they are. But when you're parenting, you should always try to be firm yet and compassionate, teaching and parenting them in a way that is connected with your partner, so you're not contradicting what your partner says. And above all, you should make sure that what you are teaching them, how you are parenting, it is all biblical. That way, if anything goes wrong, or if you see any issues, you know where to source back to. So let's look at this graph here. For parenting methods, we see that, I want to explain that parents that are way too strict tend to have a reaction in their children that is more fearful. The child can end up hating or resenting their parents because of how strict it was, and that can be hard. The child can also be very rebellious, trying to deny how strict the rules have been set. So you don't want to be too strict on your children. But on the other end of the spectrum, we want to look at too relaxed. When children are parented in a form that is too relaxed, they have little comprehension of what is right and what is wrong. This causes them to lose their way, and it creates a larger potential for them to think it's all right to commit crimes. So there needs to be a middle ground, and you need to make sure that you and your spouse find that middle ground and agree upon it. Next, I would like to discuss faith. Faith should be between the couple, even before you begin the family unit. Between the couple, you need to establish that you need to love God first and most. This is throughout all time, since the beginning of time. This has always been the rule. And you can do this by living a God-loving and honoring marriage and showcasing your love for Him. And you will be building your relationship together on a firm foundation. You should allow prayer time together. This allows you to connect with God, hear each other's gratitude and hardships, thus living your life with your partner on a spiritual level. You should also have agape love, which is God-like love for each other. That way it's not just personal love, it's not just intimate love, it's not just regular love, but it's godly love. Now in the family unit, you need to find a church that's healthy, and you need to find ways to connect into that church. And this should be something you should do whether or not you have kids or in that family unit type situation. Next, you should establish faith traditions, because those are going to create memories for your kids. And those are going to be things that your kids think on years later. And it will make a big difference later in their lives when they're older and they make their own faith decisions. You can do the same thing through family devotions, creating those memories, teaching them those lessons. And finally, I want to point out that you should model a relationship with Christ to your kids. You need to show your beliefs to your kids, allowing them to be actively engaged with you and how you live your faith. You can let them see you confess your sins to show that you're not always in the right and that that's okay. All right, I would like to move on to my next point in just a moment. Red flags that lead to marriage counseling. The first red flag I would like to point out is the feeling of rejection by one partner. If one person feels rejected by the other, it kills the growth of intimacy, which is required for love to flourish. The problem will get worse if one or neither spouse is willing to seek counseling and get help. At that point, the relationship would be in critical condition, or, in my opinion, on life support. Now, let's move on to red flag number 2. No compromise. If you are not willing to compromise, which is what we were discussing earlier, then there's no progress. This creates a block in a relationship. Not only that it becomes a lose-win situation where one person gains their desires or wins arguments by ignoring the other and pushing them aside, but nothing is happening. You are stuck in a negative emotional situation. The third red flag is the loss of emotional connection. Without emotional connection, there is not really anything special about you and your marriage. And that is a very visible sign and cry for help for a relationship to seek counseling. And it is important to note that if you or your partner are not willing to admit that something is wrong, or are not willing to go and seek counseling when these signs are visible, that it's really worse than you thought it was. And the final red flag: constant conflict with no resolution. If a couple never gets along or never makes any progress towards understanding the other, they end up fighting each other, potentially perceiving the other as the enemy in any conflict or disagreement. Without professional help, this is a recipe for chaos. If you are experiencing or seeing any of these things in your relationship, then I advise you to seek help and admit that something is wrong. And then probably and potentially, maybe the best thing to do is apologize to your partner. Finally, I would like to thank you for listening to all of these points and to this PowerPoint presentation. I believe that by applying all these facets and elements to your marriage, you and your spouse will strengthen your relationship. May God forever bless you in your new covenant. Thank you for joining. Goodbye.